Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I am your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really glad to have with me for the first time on the show Brian Groves. He is the CEO and a director of Genesis Metals Corporation. Brian has got a rich history as a geologist and exploration guy in the mining industry, over 30 years of experience. He's worked in Australia and various places in Canada, and he has been involved in exploration for coal, gold, diamonds, and base metals with Amex Minerals, Noranda, and Placer Dome. So he's been working with the big boys in the past. He's now working with the smaller companies and helping to find wealth in the ground. Since 2003, he served as chief executive officer of two TSX Venture exchange-listed companies, and the one we want to talk to him today about, of course, is Genesis Metals. Thanks for joining me today, Brian.
Well, Jay, thanks very much for having me. I appreciate being here.
Well, it's really good to have you. I know that our paths have crossed in over the years at various times, and it's an industry that's up and down, and now I think it's heading up. So I'm looking for the sun to shine for some years to come, at least for a couple of years. Let's hope. I should mention before we get started here. Genesis Metals trades in Toronto under the symbol GIS, and you can buy it down here in the States, as I have, under the symbol GGISF. I have 67.6 million shares out. Company just recently did a financing. It's selling at around 14 cents in U.S. money, as right before showtime, gives it a market cap of around $10 million U.S., so it's truly a baby microcap company yet. Brian, I'd like to start out by asking you, your exploration property is located in the famous Abitibi Greenstone Belt in Quebec. Millions of ounces of gold have been mined there in the past. Your property is named the Chevier, and it's very large. I think it's something like 96 square kilometers. As a geologist, can you explain in terms that people, perhaps lay people can understand, what it is that you see in the rocks there that give you hope for some success?
Jay, you're correct. It's part of the Abitibi Greenstone Belt. It's close to a town called Chibougamau, which, for your listeners that may have some understanding of Quebec, it's right at the almost at the extreme eastern end of the Abitibi Greenstone Belt. Chibougamau has been a quite productive area. It's had both copper and gold production. Cumulative gold productions exceeds 5 million ounces over the years. But the Chevrier project attracted our attention simply, firstly, because of the size of the property. As you mentioned, it's just under 100 square kilometers. Very sizable land position within a very, very favorable deformation corridor. It has seen some work, but no economic deposits have been defined that have ever gone into production. But that is the opportunity, because I think one of the adages that have been applied to the Abitibi is that there are many projects that have been well drilled but poorly explored, and I think Chevrier fits into that category. There's been a history of exploration on the project going back to some of the majors, the blue chip mid-tier base metal producers, multi-commodity producers such as Minova, and others have worked on the project, advanced the project certainly in at least two key target horizons. But those areas represent probably less than 3 to 4% of the total property area. So we still see lots of potential. There's a major deformation corridor. We see that the corridor is rich with gold endowment. There's multiple showings, multiple grab samples, multiple trench results that indicate gold is in the system. So we're looking at it from basically going right back to basics, building up an understanding of the geology, the prospectivity, and looking at targeting in terms of, rather than following the previous course that others have followed in terms of going back to the known resources and popping a few holes in and just walking away. So hopefully that summarizes the situation for you.
Yeah, all right. Well, you're saying there's three main areas, or three areas where there have been some gold discovery. One of them is, I think you have a 43-101 compliant resource of 300,000 ounces from the main zone, you call it, grading 1.99, I'll call it 2 grams per ton. And then you have a historical non-compliant resource of 540,000 ounces, grading 1.8 grams per ton. Of course, are you planning to do some drilling there to bring that up to conform to the 43-101 standards?
That's correct, Jay. And intriguingly, under the current requirements of 43101, the report that you referred to was completed in 2010, and because it was done by a predecessor company, unrelated to Genesis, it even is now regarded as historic in nature, even though the work was done under the guidance of NI 43101.
Oh.
So what we're looking at now is basically taking the data that we have available, and we're very fortunate that we have at least 70,000 meters of drill core available. On the property, and that principally comes from the main zone and the south zone, and those two areas are located roughly in the center of the project area. We've also uncovered core from about 50 holes in the northeastern corner of the property that was drilled back in the late 1980s by Falcon Ridge Copper, and they identified a small resource of gold as well, but it's open. So our intent this year is as we move to a drill phase, and that early indications here would be that we would be starting around about July 1st or 2nd with a drill program. We're planning to drill new targets on the property as well as go back and do the requisite amount of both infill sort of step-out drilling as well as confirmation drilling in the main zone that would be necessary under 43101 to allow us to use the historic information and incorporate that into potentially an updated resource. And the best indication I can give you and your listeners would be that resource probably won't come out until possibly Q1 or Q2 of next year. We have actually compiled all the data on the property, as I mentioned, earlier in the conversation, and that has identified at least 7 or 8 priority targets away from the main zone. These apparently have never been drilled. We've scoured the assessment files from the Quebec government. We can find little, if any, indications of drill follow-up on some of these targets. These are favorable geology with grab samples running gold. So our intent with our drill program is probably to spend the bulk of the money on evaluating those new target areas and putting a smaller amount of the drill allocation into the main zone to allow us to hopefully bring the main zone into a compliant resource early next year.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying there's 7 or 8 targets in addition to the main zone and the historical area?
That's correct, yes. And we completed a small IP survey in the winter months, and we've generated 2 additional IP targets, which appear never to have been drilled. One actually is I'm quite excited by it. It's a westward extension of the northeast zone that I mentioned, the zone that was drilled by Falcon Ridge Copper up in the northeastern corner of the property. And it's intriguing. The main deformation corridor, which seems to host most of the gold throughout the project, is trending in a roughly northeast direction. For most of your listeners, they may be aware that many of the trends, like the Porcupine Dester and the Larder Lake Cadillac Break, tend to be more east-west. What we see at the northern end of the project is actually a deformation corridor that starts to trend east-west, and it would appear that our northeast trending zone, the deformation corridor, seems to coalesce in the northern part of the property. So from a macro scale, this is obviously a very, very interesting area in which to focus, and it just so happens we have untested IP targets in this area. And again, as I said, it looks to be an apparent westward extension from the Falcon Ridge Copper drilling area. So we are eager to get onto these new targets and demonstrate that the potential still exists on the project, discovering more gold, which is, I think, the key for our focus this year.
Well, it seems to me that perhaps you're the first company to come along and look at this entire land package and look at it from a macro point of view. And really, it seems to me that you must have an enormous number of things to look at. Also, you mentioned all this drilling, 70,000 meters in the past, and another 50 holes or so by, was it Falcon Bridge?
That's right.
So, I mean, you're probably pulling all that data together now and trying to, I guess, make some sense of it from a macro point of view.
That's correct, yes. What we've done is actually we've gathered all the data thankfully, because the work was done by solid blue chip companies such as Minerva,
sure.
the records are in very, very good shape. So we do have complete drill logs. We have assay databases. We've spent a lot of time, though, digitizing those data because some of the data sets are digital, but most of the data are unfortunately just on paper copies. So we're going to a lot of trouble to digitize those data. And we're actually building 3D wireframe models. For your listeners that may be aware of that, that's really just an attempt to try and put a solid boundary around the gold mineralization. And that's being done for each of the main zone, south zone, and the so-called east zone drilled by Falconbridge. And this is a better way of understanding what the distribution and controls and mineralization are so that we can better focus our drilling and see where the best opportunities within those mineralized shells appear to be. Just as an aside, an early interpretation from the modeling done in the main zone, it first thought to be a fairly discontinuous series of high-grade, almost vertical chutes. Mm-hmm. But now we're looking at it from, if we lower the overall grade, that the grade's down to about 0.3 to 0.5 grams, we start to see quite promising continuity with multiple sort of vein sets within the broader main zone itself. So this obviously begs the question then that if we can start to see continuity, what happens between those individual vein sets? And we are actually in the process of going and taking several holes and actually splitting, sampling, and assaying from top to bottom to see if what was originally interpreted as barren core actually may contain grade. We just don't know. A lot of sort of fairly cost-effective, simple activities that can be done that can actually add to the value of the project by going back to the historic core and just reassessing it. So that's what we've been doing. Extensive period during 2016 when all we were doing was collecting historic data, collating it, making sure it was clean, and then that allows us then to maximize our drill programs when we start in July.
Well, this is really exciting. So what you're saying is there might be some potential for some real bulk mineable situation here that you don't know yet. I mean, you've got a lot of work to do, but you could be looking at something potentially very, very large, very significant, I would think. And it strikes me also, Brian, that, the numbers that you have there, 2 grams. I mean, we're talking about an open pit here. We're talking about surface, aren't we?
That's right. Yeah, the main zone does come to surface. That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, we don't know the geometry yet. You probably have a lot of work to do in terms of knowing how this thing is going to sit in the ground or how the mineable economic target might. I guess there's so many things to answer yet. We always like to know as soon as possible what some fatal flaws are. You look at things like one of the things you don't have to worry about too much where you are, and that's infrastructure. In Quebec, it looks pretty good. I mean, it's hard to say near Chibougamau that you'd have a problem. You usually have cheap power up there. You have good mining people. You've got good roads, access, and all that, right? But what about any metallurgy done yet, or is it just simply too early? You just don't know enough yet.
It is simply too early, Jay. That's correct. But what we plan to do this summer is. There's really with the wealth of core that we have, historic core, we can actually do drill core composites. I've been on several projects where you can do a lot of very productive preliminary metallurgical recovery work just on composite drill core samples, rather than going to the trouble of drilling either large diameter holes or collecting a bulk sample. So we plan to do that this summer with the funds that we have, just to start to understand the metallurgy. Just empirically looking at the core, there doesn't seem to be much in the way of anything that could be deleterious, such as arsenic pyrite or anything like that. And the nature of the gold with this sulfide, mainly the pyrite mineralization, seems to suggest that the grains aren't intertwined, which is something that you don't want to see. So we believe it's a fairly straightforward process based on what we see in the drill core in terms of the nature of the gold. So again, as I mentioned, we'll be doing some metallurgical test work this summer to confirm what recoveries might look like.
Sure, absolutely. Native issues, anything there? You're okay with the locals?
Yes, we are. We're very fortunate. We're very early into the project, but I think where you and I probably first met was with a company called Spanish Mountain Gold, where I actually was involved for about 4 or 5 years with consultation with First Nations, Native groups, and so on. The Cree in northern Quebec, they're very. I think they're a very practical community, and we had established contact with the local community and advised them that we'll be working in the area. I think my experience in British Columbia with Spanish Mountain Gold is actually, given me a good, shall I say, advantage in terms of the protocols and the process in terms of engaging people in communications and discussions about projects. But we foresee no problems. Actually, a lot of mining activity is underway now with the participation of First Nations groups. There's actually an investment fund in northern Quebec that is, I believe, has Cree investment money in it, and it's specifically targeted for investments north of Chibougamau. So a fairly progressive environment that we find ourselves in, and so we don't foresee any problems there.
Yeah, I know. I'm familiar with the Cree, and they're successful businessmen. They're one of the few Indian tribes that I know of that have done very, very well. But anyway, we're just about out of time. Maybe you can take 30 seconds. You've got another project in Ontario. It's called the October Project. You going to do anything with that this year? And then tell us how much money you have in the till and how far that will take you. Then we'll have to go to break.
Sounds good. October Gold is it's basically the cornerstone project that was the formation of the predecessor company called Entourage. So Entourage became Genesis when we acquired the Chevrier project from the Toronto Junior. October Gold is a very significant land position. It's 200 square kilometers. We're not planning any major work on the project this year, Jay. It's in a very, very strategic location with majors all around us. We're just planning some basic targeting summary compilation maps, much as we did for Chevrier, just to see what the prospectivity and try to quantify the prospectivity of the project. And from that will help us form budgets for work probably next year, maybe Q1. Our treasury currently sets conservatively around about 3.5 to 3.6 million Canadian. We just closed the financing for 3.25 million as of Monday, and that was announced. So we are in very, very, very well positioned in terms of having the financial resources to do all the work I've mentioned on Chevrier this summer, with drilling anticipated to start in early July.
All right, excellent. Well, we'll have to leave it go at that, Brian. It sounds like a very exciting story. Hope to talk to you again about it sometime in the near future.
Thanks very much.
All right, folks.
And I appreciate the opportunity.